right, let's do this. It's been a long time since I did one of these Call from the Grave, or if you're listening on your podcast platform, Agitators Anonymous. If you're listening, you won't know exactly what I'm holding up here, but it is a 12-inch copy of Wasp, Fuck Like a Beast. The year is 1989. I'm in quite a lot of trouble at school. There's been letters home to my parents. My parents have been called in to explain my behaviour. All sorts of things. In fact, the whole moment is a bit like a 1980s heavy metal video, because if my memory serves correctly, on the morning show on RTE, I think it was a Friday, the Gay Burn morning radio show, no, that isn't an Urban Dictionary term, it was Ireland's longest serving and much beloved radio broadcaster and TV broadcaster, and they were playing Wasp on the morning show, or they were discussing it. Wasp were playing in the Top Hat in Dunleary at the time, and me and my friends had tickets to go, and I was in so much trouble in school when he called round for me that evening and went, come on, let's go, and my parents were standing behind the door listening, straight out of a 1980s video. But they played Wasp on the morning show, and my mother was like, this is not what you're into, is it? What are you gonna do with your life? And I went, no, I like much heavier stuff than that, probably, you know. And I didn't go and see Wasp on the Headless Children tour, much to my regret. So I'm going to talk about Wasp. It's going to be interesting. I haven't done a Call from the Grave in a while, as I said, or an Agitators Anonymous. This isn't going to be a crazy vinyl one. For some reason, I seem to have less vinyl than I remember. I actually had the original other one. There's another one which is a dog attacking a woman. The first Wasp single, Fuck Like a Beast, was taken off the very first album. It should, I think, open the record, which is unusual when you hear they have different productions, but I'm going to get into all that kind of stuff, because the story of Wasp is really bloody long. It dates back to the mid-1970s. So here we go. Let's have a little chat about Wasp. One of, in my opinion, the greatest heavy metal bands of all time. And yes, heavy metal, not glam rock, heavy metal. So let's get into it. Wasp, Call from the Grave, Agitators Anonymous. Excuse me while I put on my bifocals. The thing about myself and Bones, the guitar player, Dread Seven, were discussing this. There's a brilliant documentary about the bass player of the New York Dolls. Now, you may have noticed recently, what's his name? David Sylvain from the... God, I didn't get that wrong. I got that wrong, didn't I? It's not David Sylvain. Anyway, the singer of... I'll remember in a minute. My fucking memory. Singer of New York Dolls died recently. If you don't know the New York Dolls, please go back and listen to them. Morrissey was their fan club founder, I think, in the UK in the late 1970s. Is that the urban myth? The first couple of New York Dolls, they were more or less like punk, hard edge street kind of glitter, glam, scuzzy, dirty punk rock before everyone else was doing it. And Johnny Thunders was that heroin chic, dyed black hair, basically like Nicky Sixx, and like the face that launched 1,000 boats, so to speak, of that image, the tight leather jacket, the black hair. There's like the Ramones and the New York Dolls were sort of first, I guess. Hit me up in the comments if you think that's untrue. But you should go and check out the New York Dolls. And there's a beautiful documentary about the bass player of New York Dolls, Arthur Killer Kane, who basically got to play... after the band broke up, he tried to do this band called the Killer Kane Band, which is actually where I'm slowly getting to the beginning of the Wasp story. But go and find the documentary. I can't remember what it's called, but it's really beautiful because he just is in the wilderness for years and years and years without any real knowledge of what the New York Dolls came to mean to people, as one of the most seminal rock bands of all time. And it follows their kind of slow reformation, and they play this gig in London. It's a little bit sort of Anvil vibes. Go and find it. But the New York Dolls were touring. They were touring in 1975, and Johnny Thunders left the tour. And so to continue the tour, they auditioned several guitar players. And a lot of people don't know this, but the one who ended up filling in for some of that tour is Blackie Lawless. Blackie Lawless filled in for Johnny Thunders. 1975 for the remainder of a tour. And so he followed, as the story goes, Arthur Killer Kane out to form a band in LA. And he plays on 1 7-inch, and he's listed as Blackie Guzman, as stated on the back of the Killer Kane's only EP. I'm having a little look at Wikipedia at the same time here. But yeah, and then this is 1975, so very interesting origin story. Then he formed the band Sister. I'm going to have to try and get through this before we get to the present day, which was with former Wasp guitarist Randy Piper. 1978, Nikki Sixx joins. This is Sister. And, you know, the Sister demos are up on YouTube. It's sort of, you can hear some Wasp songs. You can hear, I mean, I think Vince Neil even sings on the demo, which is in the early 80s. I mean, look, if Blackie Lawless is in your band, he sings all day. He's one of the greatest heavy metal vocalists of all time, if not my favorite. Then they changed the name to Circus Circus in 1979. Terrible name, but gives you an idea into the sort of the theatrical origins of the band, of what they were trying to do. You can see old interviews with Wasp in the early 80s where he's talking about this kind of like psychodrama, and they wanted to have this sort of almost like burlesque kind of S&M themed sort of stage show. There's a brilliant sort of footage of Wasp. I guess they're playing in 82, 83. And it's things you would have seen Marilyn Manson do in the 90s and Watain do in the 2000s. There's, you know, Blackie is fire breathing onto a metal backdrop which is, I guess, is gaslit in a small venue, flames everywhere. There's balloons filled with rotting blood and maggots shooting them with a BB gun, if I'm not adding extra sort of layers of insanity to the whole thing. Feathers, blood everywhere. There is a box with raw meat in it where they're flinging it out into the audience. All sorts of crazy stuff. Nikki Sixx went on to form the band London, who have some album from the late 80s with a really brilliant cover that I can't remember. And, you know, in 1982, it goes on to form Motley Crue. And this is where you can, if you go back to this sort of Los Angeles early family tree, you'll find so many of them in each other's bands. But out of that, we get lots of great bands, whether it's Dokken, whether it's Wasp, whether it's Motley Crue. So that's the kind of origin story. That is the kind of origin story of Wasp. And it's really hard to put into words for people how shocking they were. Like the first single is called, you know, it is Fuck Like a Beast, and I think that's the changed cover. You know, the codpiece with the, you know, the buzzsaw blade on it and everything. The original cover was a woman being attacked by a Doberman. And it, you know, you can hear on one of the live albums, he's like, this one became the biggest selling import single of all time. I don't know about that, but the band's infamy was solidified, and they took Fuck Like a Beast off the record, which in the end became the debut album's sort of promo in itself. And this is what, 1984. So to put that in context, 1984 is Power Slave, it is Haunting the Chapel, Ride the Lightning, that kind of stuff. And Wasp are, it just kind of explodes. This is one of, if somebody said to me this is the greatest heavy metal debut record of all time, and I include Iron Maiden, Merciful Fate, Melissa, I could probably hear that as an argument. I could hear that as a debate. I mean, this is that was good podcasting. It is one of the absolute most, I mean, I Want to Be Somebody as your opener. I mean, it is one of the greatest opening songs of all time. Love Machine, The Flame, BAD, School Days, Hellion, Sleeping in the Fire, On Your Knees, Tormentor. If only it had Fuck Like a Beast included on it, it probably would have achieved that. I could do without School Days, and you could put on Fuck Like a Beast, and it is absolutely one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time. Tone, and as I said before, insane vocals. Like, I prefer this kind of singing to your Bruce Dickinsons and stuff. It's, in a way, it's harder because it has such filth and grit in the voice, which is so excoriating. Excoriate, great band. Pestilential Winds, I think the album's called. Old German speed thrash band, very good. Anyway, it's so caustic, so harsh, and the tone, it's so aggressive. There's a brilliant footage of them playing. I think it's like Irving Meadows supporting Iron Maiden in 1984. Despite Rod Smallwood's best efforts to kind of scupper them, I think it's so full of what would now be called toxic masculinity. It is so charged with testosterone and maleness, and that is part of its greatness, in that it is absolutely belligerent. It is so stubbornly dogmatic. W.A.S.P is in these early days. The stage show when they're playing their club shows is absolutely fucking wild. There's a famous video. I think it's live in '85 in London, and even though the kind of mythology is a bit hidden now, and people don't, because Blackie became a bit sort of, I think, a kind of bit embarrassed about some of the antics of the band from the 1980s, or a bit Christian or whatever. But I mean, there's a moment where they tie a woman dressed as a nun to like a wooden altar, and then he rips off her habit, turns her around, and then simulates rape with a knife, and then goes down on her and gets covered in blood. Of course, the Chinese whispers of that moment become sometimes greater than the actual moment. But that's as I remember, that's the censored bit of the show from London. And they're throwing raw meat out into the crowd, rotting meat, and the band are starting with Hellion, and the guys are all holding onto them in chains. I mean, it's just absolute, total and utter shock rock, but it's shock rock in a different way to some of the other shock rock bands, in that the music is just so hard-edged, and the music is so it's just full of life and dynamics. It's absolutely fucking insanely good. And I kind of slept on W.A.S.P a bit as a kid, because by 88, 89, which is Headless Children time, and we'll get to that, I was mainly listening to thrash metal and early death metal and stuff. If I'd heard W.A.S.P properly in 87 or 88, probably I would have liked them more. But it took me a few years after that to appreciate them. But like I said, I did have the ticket to go and see them in 89, and still to this day, much to my chagrin. But this is the debut, 1984. Absolutely one of the greatest heavy metal records of all time. If you've been sleeping on this because you think it's fucking cock rock or something, you're a fucking idiot. It's absolutely one of the greatest records of all time. So, The Last Command, which in my opinion has maybe one of the greatest songs, and I would say pop rock. Well, I mean, look, it's heavy metal, but like just one of the most. Wild Child is one of the most incredibly composed rock songs of all time. The production is insane. The singing is absolutely off the charts. The composition of the song. If you want to, back in the day, if you were like, dating somebody or going out with them, and they were like, "Oh, what is all this nonsense about that you were in, the music that you're into?" One listen to Wild Child, and they would have been like, "Oh, okay, I get it." Back when rock could be kind of dirty and scuzzy and sexy and stuff, but definitely Wild Child was like just like a sort of opening sentence or something. Absolutely one of the greatest opening songs, and singing just off the charts. That's kind of singing off the charts. Yeah, look what I'm doing, wielding my glasses. The whole album: Skull Crusher, Fistful of Diamonds, Jack Action, Widowmaker, Blind in Texas. And by this stage, if you read the liner notes of the first album, the first album had sold almost 2 million copies. Wikipedia says the band have sold 12 million copies. So they were selling millions of copies of records. And to put that into context, I think the biggest selling Judas Priest album is about 3.5. W.A.S.P were probably selling 2 million copies of this, I would guess, These are big numbers. And I mean, obviously now they're, huge numbers. But if you've seen W.A.S.P playing to like 600 or 700 people 10 or 15 years ago, like many bands from the 80s, they used to play in stadiums. Now that must be an insanely difficult thing for your ego to handle, to go from doing, 5, 10, 15,000 people down to playing to 4, 5 or 600. But that's kind of what happened to much of the 80s rock, or glam rock scene. But I would say it's unfair to put Wasp into the same category as, bands like Cinderella or... Well, actually, the first two Cinderella albums are really good. They're more heavy metal band, but you can see on this record the shocking image is what first made them explode onto the scene, and then it began to get tamed as they began to get bigger, which sort of makes sense, I guess, in a way. But this is an absolute beast of a record, and also it's huge production, and you can hear these sort of interesting tones in the back of Wild Child, these sort of strange keyboard hums. Play Wild Child in a pub or club through a big stereo, and you could just see exactly. It's just absolutely fucking perfect. This, Inside the Electric Circus, third album. What is going on with the fucking cover? Sort of cheetah. Is that cheetah? It's not leopard, is it? It's cheetah. I suppose because there's a song called Sweet Cheetah on it. Sweet Cheetah. At the time, strangely enough, like, I did an episode maybe 100 odd ago about the Satanic Panic, which was like a very strange moment in 1980s society where there was this obsession by people like the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Centre, which were trying to put those explicit lyric signs on records. That was their doing. It was run by Tipper Gore, wife of Al Gore, trying to censor records. And they had their Dirty Dozen, which had Wasp on it. It had Twisted Sister. It had Sheena Easton. Strange how the people censoring records in the 1980s were sort of right-wing evangelical Christians and have now become, predominantly people on the sort of, cultural, left or something like this. Very odd how this kind of horseshoe of connection comes around, But back in the 1980s, it was evangelical Christian groups trying to censor music, and there was a moment where there was this thing called the Satanic Panic, which was where it was really strange. It was like a sort of spectral evidence, like Salem witch trials, just social contagion of young people saying they were abducted and they'd been taken part in satanic rituals. People went to prison for it. There was early psychiatrists going sort of, I suppose this is where the spectral evidence thing comes, sort of going back and finding repressed memories of being in covens, and go back and look it up. But I did a podcast about it, and Wasp were part of that. I mean, Wasp were, for Irish viewers, listeners, they were on the Black Lotus on the cover of Hot Press, which was the biggest Irish music magazine at the time in 1987. They played again in Ireland. Well, they played in Ireland in 85 and 87 before my my heavy metal teenage meltdown in 1989. And he'd been shot at by Christian fundamentalists. There had been all sorts of... he said he was having his phone tapped, all this kind of crazy stuff. I mean, there really was this big, I suppose, similar to the 1960s, where the CIA was looking into hippie culture. There was a sort of 80s movement into, as I said, through the PMRC, trying to ban music and stuff. And it's really strange because Twisted Sister run it with We're Not Gonna Take It. Put that into context in 1993, and it's like positively ridiculous considering some of the pop music, the wet-ass pussies or whatever, music being, sold to 11-year-olds or whatever. We're Not Going to Take It, in the same context, it just seems sort of, the whole thing obviously is utterly ridiculous, but Wasp were certainly part of that. And this record, 95 Nasty, is really great. I really like The Rock Rolls On. Restless Gypsy. I mean, Restless Gypsy, for example, is a song, really is just a couple of chords, but if you can sing like Blackie Lawless, you can just literally sing everything. Easy Living, Uriah Heep cover. Not really too sure about that. It's a little bit kind of sort of less aspirational than The Last Command. It's a bit sort of dumber, dafter. They started to adopt this sort of cowboy kind of look. There's like some live videos from '87, but it's still, I think, a really good record. Oh, he's got very long nails on the front there. Difficult to play the guitar. But I'm not sure the cheetah bodysuit really stands the test of time. However, it is a really good record. I mean, look, if you could listen to Blackie Lawless sing the dictionary, to be honest with you. Inside the Electric Circus, great song. I Don't Need No Doctor. Okay, so it has I Don't Need Doctor and Easy Living, 2 covers on it. That's sort of points to running out of ideas a little bit, doesn't it, when you have 2 covers on your albums? Then we have this, Live in the Raw, which doesn't really seem very live. It has Harder, Faster, and the Manimal, two of the best Wasp songs that never made any record. Is it really live? The singing doesn't sound live. The crowd reactions don't sound live at all. It's got a touch of Live on Dead about it. It sort of feels a bit like it might have been recorded in the studio and then touched up, like many records back then. Certainly, the song "Screaming Till You Like It" was on the horror movie, C Division horror movie, The Ghoulies. Definitely worth having, especially for those tracks that didn't make it onto any record. Now here's where it gets a bit squirrely, because I don't have all the vinyls that I have on CD are sort of stacked at the bottom of a huge big stack, and it risks destroying the entire ecosystem if I pull out a tiny CD. So I've got a couple of them. By this stage, of course, by '89, so the Headless Children, which I'll bring up on the screen, I do have on vinyl, but for some reason I can't find it. Headless Children is really, in my estimation, the last truly great Wasp record. It's 1989. It's much more serious. It's much more political. It has a huge tone, a huge sound. It's got Mean Man on it, which is an absolute, stormer of a song. It is arguably, I think, a better record. I think it definitely a better record than Inside the Electric Circus. I would say, if someone said to me Headless Children is probably the best Wasp album, or at least top 2 or 3, I could live with that. I think it's, the Neutron Bomber. But Wasp are starting to, I think, move past the sort of goofiness, trying to be a little bit more serious. Don't forget, by '88, '89, music was getting heavier. Of course, grunge and Nirvana's around the corner, which, as you'll see in the 1990s, kind of even did for a band like Wasp, But the Headless Children, yeah, it's for somebody who is maybe put off by some of the big hair stuff and wants to start in a different place with Wasp. I would probably recommend maybe Headless Children listen to first, and you can hear this huge tone and stuff. I think Chris Holmes leaves after this, the infamous Chris Holmes. If you want to go and watch the footage of him being interviewed by the pool for the decline of Western civilization, just sculling vodka and stuff. But that whole 1980s era of sort of decadence was, you could tell, probably just about to come crashing down. So we're in 1989 now. Crimson Idol, I don't have the original record. I have the CD. Some people love the Crimson Idol, and I think it was engineered by Ross Robinson, who was in Detente, good thrash metal band from the 1980s, who then went on to make Korn, went on to make all the big new metal bands. But I'm feeling he was the assistant engineer in this, and it's a fucking weird sounding record. Frankie Banali from Quiet Riot is playing the drums, and it's like, dude, you don't need to put a fucking roll in every fucking second. It's just, it drives me fucking nuts. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It's just like, dude, just play the fucking beat and stop. There's hardly any bass end. It's really strange. It's Chainsaw Charlie, absolute killer. It's Wasp. It's Blackie trying to do the Who, trying to do a Who style rock opera, like Tommy or something like this. And it's about as near as he gets, even though he keeps trying to return to that theme of trying to do the Who. Can somebody explain to me how the Who go from like mod band to rock band, but mod people still like them because mods and rockers were against each other in Quadrophenia? How can you go from one to the other? Who knows? I have no clue. Anyway, this is Wasp trying to be like the Who. It's a really great record. I mean, you really don't need the story of Jonathan at the end. Maybe I listened to that once when I was 17 or 18. The side two, you've got a bad Led Zeppelin cover, and then you've got a couple of live songs from Donington '92, and they're fucking, oof, they're unmixed and unmessed with. That's for sure. They're fucking. I remember listening to them going, "Fucking hell, this is ropey." Some people love this. It's got maybe Wasp's best ballads, if that's your kind of thing. I'm not really interested in ballads. Dr. Rocker, I Am One, The Idol. Yeah, The Idol was that's the big ballad on this, Again, listen, it's Blackie Lawless singing. So, I mean, you'll take most things, The next one is, so they disappear for a couple of years here, and the Crimson Idol was, theoretically, Blackie Lawless wanted that to be his solo album, and then the record label went, come on, really? But still not black enough. The band then disappeared for 3 years. They kind of disband. Grunge is happening. Nirvana happens. Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. The usual conversation you've heard from many, many 80s heavy metal, and especially a band right on the edge of hair rock, heavy hair, whatever, with like Wasp, is that Nevermind kind of, I won't say did for their career, but it just changed the musical landscape so drastically that the Crimson Idol is kind of the last moment where Wasp could have, if Crimson Idol had come out a year later, I think it would been kind of buried a bit. But still, they just disappear then for a while, So you've got Still Not Black Enough, which I do own somewhere. It's got a raven on the front. This is a strange record. It just sounds like a drum machine. Goodbye America, that's a cool song. I'm just speaking off the top of my head here. I'm going to have to have a little look. Yeah, it's a 6th studio album, June 95. Wasn't released in the US until 86. Wow, it's really nobody cared. Considered a success of the Crimson Idol, strong. Yeah, I mean, it's got Somebody to Love by Jefferson Airplane on it as your second song. Really. Tie Your Mother Down, Queen cover, Rock and Roll to Death. It's a strange record, and if you can, of course, it's worth owning. You could track it down. By this stage, you can tell it's just Blackie Lawless. I would imagine what he's done is he's built a home studio, and he's got a buddy around the corner who plays the drums. I guess that's Frankie Benali, and he's just making everything himself. And he's taken advances from different record labels, which I think is the story of the next 20, 25, 30 years. Whoever will give him a big enough advance, and then just making the record himself. That's my guess. Strange record, just making covers. I don't think they're touring in 1995. I don't think they're, like many bands, whether it's Dokken or something. At least one thing I could say about Wasp at this moment is they didn't go and make a grunge record. There's tons of bands from that era, whether it's Dokken, whether it's it's the amount of hair bands who tried to move into grunge is just kind of ridiculous. All with the sort of weird, crappy, angular covers and 90s art. I think I did a podcast about that before, or at least I did a podcast with Joe from Gamma Bomb discussing all of the bands, and there was just this big long list of bands who were just didn't know what to do. I just happened to pick on Dokken, and I think Wasp also didn't know what to do. So the next year, 95, 96, is where Marilyn Manson starts to get big, and Marilyn Manson, so as the rumor goes, starts to cite Wasp as an influence. Now, I don't remember hearing that because I obviously wasn't caring what Marilyn Manson said at the time. But certainly his image, the kind of shock rock theme, the shock kind of, there was echoes, no doubt, certainly about Marilyn Manson that echoed that Wasp show. Not as brutal, but that sort of, it was a bit lascivious, a bit dirty, a bit filthy, and it was very much in contrast to where the sort of plaid flannel shirt brigade were going with grunge and stuff. And so this is a CD that I didn't want to take out from the bottom of a huge big rack of CDs, but it's Kill, Fuck, Die. And this is where Wasp began to return. This Chris Holmes comes back to the band. They make their return to the stage in sort of 500 to 800 venues. They've got, you know, TVs as crucifixes showing hardcore porn where they're playing. There's, you know, Chris Holmes has his famous Die Eats here, Lady Diana and an arrow down to playing in the UK, and they're black eyelinered up again, and it's dirty, greasy, filthy kind of stuff. It's a weird record. It has. Let me just see who the fucking the engineer is, but it's 1997. It kind of incorporates. It says industrial. Is it industrial? Snuff rock, Blackie Lawless calls it, in the video press kit promoting the album. Yeah, highly transgressive stage show. Lawless performed mock rapes of a crucified nun as well as chainsaw decapitations of fake pigs. Wow, okay, so maybe that's where that comes from. Sorry, just having my mini stroke there. Yeah, 1987, Kill Fuck Die. I remember the first single, hearing it, and I just couldn't really believe what I was hearing. It still has something. The song Kill Your Pretty Face. There's a couple of really sort of dark, long. It got pretty dark, but it's a weird production. You can tell it's trying to be modern. Some young engineers come in and gone, we need to get rid of the guitar tone and get rid of the bass tone. I don't think it's been re-released. I think it's been. I've never seen it on vinyl. I presume it is. It's worth tracking down as a really strange anomaly, an addendum to the Wasp career. Then is one of my favorite records. The absolutely dumb as fucking a bag of really fucking stupid things. Is Heldorado. I love this record. 1999. It kind of reminds me of the sister demos, or sort of dirty, scuzzy barroom boogie. At the time, it fit really along in with the Helicopters' debut, Nashville Pussy. It's, you know, Don't Cry, in brackets, Just Suck. I don't know why you need to put that in brackets, but you could have just put it as one word, I suppose. Damnation Angels, yeah, that's an old song. Dirty Balls, obviously about playing football. I mean, when you look back at old soccer pitches in the 1980s, very fierce muddy, especially around the centre circle. It's probably what that's about. High on the Flames, Cocaine Cowboys. I mean, I love that. Can't Die Tonight, Saturday Night Cockfight. It's just so dumb, but it's, if you like I said, first Helicopters, super shitty to the max, Nashville Pussy. I think this is a sort of, I prefer this. It's sort of like the Frantic Four Status Quo on meth, which probably isn't too far from some kind of truth. I think it's fucking great. Somewhere along the way we have Wasp Double Live Assassins. I think it's really cool. I think this was a kind of like made during the Kill Fuck Die era, to kind of say to old fans like, hey, we haven't completely turned our back on our old sound. It has some songs from Kill Fuck Die on it. A medley. Never do a medley, whoever the fuck you are. Never. It's a fucking terrible idea. Yeah, it has Kill Your Pretty Face and The Horror. It also has a really strange speech in I Want to Be Somebody, where he starts going off about people bullying him because he was stuttering, which seems to be a bit like, come on, really. Yeah, so it's got Kill Ahead on it, Little Death. Worth picking up to hear the songs from Kill Fuck Die with a more traditional sounding production. Where are we now? Unholy Terror. I do have Unholy Terror somewhere, but I can't find it. These next few albums on 2001 and 2002, Unholy Terror and Dying for the World. This is Was played a show at Wacken in 2001, and it was the first time some of those bands had come back to Wacken, and it was a great show. We were really surprised at how excellent they were. And this is when they start to tour a bit again. Chris Holmes has left the band again, as far as I know. But those two albums, Unholy Terror and Dying for the World, have there's some great songs on those records. Let's just have a look here. Yeah, Let It Roar, Hate to Love Me, Locomotive Man, Jethro Tull. Yeah, come on. Unholy Terror, Charisma, Who Slayed Baby Jane. I mean, it's a good record. 2001, yeah. And the same for Dying for the World. This one. Shadow Man, My Wicked Heart, Black Bone Torso, dunk 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 dunk. Yeah, you can tell it's just him writing them on his own. He's got a drummer. He's just doing the production. They don't sound like albums that are written with a band in a rehearsal room. Down for the World, Dedication to All from 9/11. Okay. Blackie Lawless is a perfectionist, normally taking 2 years or more to finish an album and have it recorded. I mean, that's Primordial. We're beyond perfectionists because it takes us 3 or 4. Those 2 records, Unholy Terror and this, certainly worth picking up. But you can hear there's something missing, which is that it sounds like somebody just on their own writing many of the same sort of riffs. And I think that's sort of exemplified in the... Well, we get the Neon God Part 1, The Rise, the Neon God Part 2, The Demise. I'll bring them up on the screen there. They come out at the same time. One, if I remember correctly, one of them has slightly better production than the other. But again, quite lo-fi in an almost Crimson Idly kind of way. Again, Blackie Lawless is trying to do his rock opera. Too many songs. This is obviously a super creative period. He's just throwing songs out there, you know. Not bad at all. Both records are okay. There's an awful lot to digest there. I'm not really too sure at that moment in 2004 that I cared too as much about the story. As I remember that time, 2004, there's not really any gigs going on. I don't remember Wasp touring heavily. It's because they tour much more now in the last 10 or 15 years. Oddly enough, since Blackie's got older than they did in the early 2000s. I mean, a lot of people were saying it's strange, you know, like even in the mid 1980s, if you listen to Live in the Raw, the backing vocals are, for a band as kind of loose as Wasp. So here's the problem I have with all the talk about can Blackie Lawless sing or not. I understand with the last tour, he was sitting down and he had problems with his spine. And some of it sounded too perfect. Now, I saw them 10 years ago and certainly he was singing. The choruses weren't the band. But for a band as kind of loose, and they always sounded very raw, Wasp. They weren't like tight. And Blackie would bring the rhythm guitar down, and the other guy would take up almost all the slack with the guitar. But when you're playing to a click, tick, 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 like a metronome, if the choruses are coming in, you have to be super tight to the click, which means that's when you see a drummer with headphones on, he's playing to a, or like little, as you see in here. You can't not play. You can't have backing vocals. I mean, maybe the guy at the desk is pushing them, but that's very complicated to do that without a metronome. So certainly I remember playing at Bang Your Head when we played one year with Primordial and standing kind of on the stairs up to the side of the stage. Security guys like, please don't come up here when Wasp are playing because we're not even told to even look at Blackie Lawless. But the monitors and the way I was watching him, he was singing. His voice, he was singing. Now, as the guys get up, but that's maybe over 10 years ago. But of course, as these singers get older and they're pushing 65, 70, they're getting a little bit of a help maybe from whoever it is at the desk is just, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if all the vocals are coming off a tape, yeah, this is bullshit. But if you see Paul Stanley getting the bit of help, I mean, look, the dude is 67, 68, 69. I think Halford gets a bit of help with some of the high screams, with some different sounds, people putting stuff in behind, It's just kind of the way things are. Once somebody gets to a certain age, there's nothing you can do. But the idea that in those early 2000s, Blackie Lawless was miming, no, I don't think so. Wasp was just too loose. I remember seeing them in Dublin maybe 25 years ago, late 90s, early 2000s, and it was pretty rough, wild sound. It's usually, that's just... I had to stop for a moment and close the window because there were people outside banging things with hammers. Working class people, will they ever just stay quiet for a while? Anyway, this allowed me to find, which won't be any good to you if you're listening to me on a podcast, but my copy of Kill Fuck Die. Yeah, don't know what's going on. Fridge door, weird sort of slipcase, trying to be modern. A pig with Kill Fuck Die on it. I mean, the band were really going all out to be maybe even more shocking than they were in the early 80s. And when you think about what's weird is this record is only 13, 14 years after their 83 sort of breakthrough. And now we're 35 years after 1990. So it's really not that great a passing of time. Killfuck Die, yeah, I mean, I'd be hard pushed to put that on again, but you know. And then Unholy Terror, I found my copy of that, which is a sort of, there's a bit more effort gone into this from the record label. It kind of comes in a book with, you know, there's lots of religious overtones, way too many explanations and liner notes, not reading that. Quite a lot of effort put into this, you know, and this was some label, Metal Is Records, I think on the back it says. And again, sometimes when you see a band who constantly change and chop labels, what this means is that they're getting X amount of money for a record, not recouping the money. Very few labels ever sign a band for one record, because obviously if they do all the promo for the one record, you know, it's like buying a footballer just for one season, and then they have a great season, and then they're like, take it easy, and they somebody, you know, just takes them for the next season as a free agent or something. Kind of similar. So no label usually signs a band for just one record. That's very, very rare, unless it's just a license, or I think maybe an inexperienced label, because if you put the work in, you want the reward of doing that second record if it's successful. So if you see a band who just constantly chopping labels, very often that means that the label gave them too much money and they just didn't sell enough to recoup. And the label goes, you know what? Usually there's incremental increases in advances. Your advance goes up a little bit from album to album. So they probably went, well, if we gave 150 grand, for argument's sake, for this record, the next one's 175. We're never making this money back. So they just cut their losses and drop them. X band then disappears for a little bit and then comes back around saying to X label and goes, oh yeah, you know, we used to be big in whatever year, and they want, you know, a big advance. Anyway, that's my guess is probably that's what happened. So where are we? We are at the album Dominator, which I also have. I probably should have looked for. Dominator is a really great record. I think it is, again, this is where Blackie's kind of going back into, I think, just doing his own thing, not touring that much. It's, again, very short, but Mercy. The production is really good on this one. Who the fuck did the production? Mark Moreau, engineer. Logan Mader, mixing. Wow. Logan Mader, that's the guy from Machine Head, is it not? Good job. Good job. Big drum sound. Vocals sound great. Mercy is a really good song. It's a Long Way to Go. Take Me Up. You know, The Burning Man. Heaven's Hung in Black. Heaven's Blessed. Good record. Short, kind of put together. I think scraped together out of half an hour of new music. But I don't know what label it's on. But I would, if you can find it, I would pick it up. And that brings us up to 2007. 2009 is Babylon. This one at the time I remember being a big sort of hit with people. Blackie's getting a bit religious there, you know. Crazy is very much like Wild Child, but Live to Die Another Day, Babylon's Burn, Deep Purple cover, Into the Fire, Thunder Red, Season of Fire. I mean, it's a good record. I think at this stage, Blackie Lawless is getting a bit mortality conscious, because he starts to get a little bit religious. Yeah, look, whatever. You can take away the drugs and alcohol and drink and replace them with religion, which is probably, I imagine, something similar to what happens with a lot of people when they go through, you know, they have to replace one thing with another. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened to Blackie Lawless, but whatever. I don't give a shit. But it's a bit biblical. I think it's a really good record. And then there's one more record after that. It's Golgotha, 2015. This is a record I never really totally got to grips with. It's got Miss You, which for whatever reason has got millions of plays on Spotify. I don't know why. Is it just because it's called Miss You? Scream, Last Runaway, Fallen Under, Slaves of the New World Order. That's you. Blackie Lawless, Doug Blair, that's the guy you see playing the guitar, who's been there for years. Mike Dudd on bass, and Michael Dupke drums. Yeah, I mean, all those records going to go together. Golgotha, Babylon, Dominator, you know, and same way in Holy Terror and Dying for the World. And that's really where we get it. We're back to W.A.S.P playing. They're touring, 40 years of the debut, I think. They're going back to playing songs they didn't want to play, such as he said, I'm never playing Fuck Like a Beast anymore and that kind of stuff. Look, at the end of the day, he can do whatever he wants with whatever the legacy of W.A.S.P is. It's his fucking band. But it's really interesting. I mean, the history of this band, or the Blackie Lawless history, goes back to 1975, like with the appearance on the Killer Kane EP, standing in for Johnny Thunders. I mean, he's a bona fide rock legend. And like I said, I don't know how much he still sings live anymore, but maybe as his back gets better, he's going to sing more. It just, sometimes I think with those old bands, just enjoy it for the fact that within reason, that, look, here's a band that are going such a long time. There's only X amount of times, the law of diminishing returns, that they still stand up on a stage. And they're going to do it to the end. And maybe that's enough. W.A.S.P, I think, for people who never really listened to them, there's a sort of, fake assumption that they were somehow only a glam rock band from the 1980s or a hair rock band or didn't have any substance. They did. They were, of course, incredibly shocking, and there was this huge, Fuck Like a Beast. There's this, the death, everything surrounding that debut is such a insanely aggressive, toxic, masculine environment. But if the songs were shit, there wouldn't be much to back it up. But they were absolutely incredible. And like I said, the debut, one of the greatest debuts of all time. I'll go into bat for any of the first 4 or 5. In fact, I'll go into bat for kind of all of them. I wouldn't say there's a single W.A.S.P album that doesn't have some redeeming qualities. The ones that do the least for me, Golgotha I never really got down with. Get Down. Or the 2 Neon God ones sort of went a bit over my head. Too much to take in. But like I said, if you pick up Dominator, which you probably should be able to do for a couple of quid, I think some great songs on that. You want some dumb rock and roll fun, Heldorado's cool. Maybe, Kill, Fuck, Die and Still Not Black Enough. But even then, they have their moments. But anything from the 80s is some of the greatest heavy metal ever made. And it's Blackie Lawless is one of my favourite vocalists of all time. I realise that I have been sort of neglecting this Call from the Grave thing. It's a bit all over the place. It's its usual chaotic, unplanned kind of stuff. It's not a vinyl tour de force this time. Although it's prompted me to go and try and find where the other couple of vinyls that I have. I have a few 7-inches somewhere. One of 95 Nasty with a lady in a leotard lifting some dumbbells. Anyway, my friends, Call from the Grave, Agitators Anonymous, blah, blah, blah. Give it up for Wendy O. Williams. And there you go. My all over the place chaotic history of W.A.S.P. Until next time.